Good morning, everybody, and welcome back, or welcome to day 2 of the inaugural workshop of Working Lands, Working Communities, the Western Governors Association Chair Initiative of our chair, Governor Brad Little of Utah. And I want to start just by thanking everybody who actively participated in yesterday's session. We started to generate so much great content that will inform the governor's consideration of the many important issues in natural resources that we are addressing. And we've got a big day today as well, or a big morning anyway, and anxious to get started. I'd also note that if you're interested, we are recording all of the sessions, which will be available on our YouTube channel for later viewing and reviewing, and all the content is being synthesized and summarized and will form the basis of an appendix that will accompany the final report on this initiative. So we are so appreciative again of your recommendations and ideas and observations and content, and on behalf of the governors, thank you for your active participation. So with that, we will get right into the first panel on forest product innovations, and I'm pleased to introduce Jamie Barnes, who will be moderating this. Jamie's the state forester of the great state of Utah, and let's get it started. Thanks, Jamie.
Thank you. Thanks for having us here today. We're excited to be here and talk about forest product innovations. And here with me today, I have Laura Alt, who is our Shared Stewardship Coordinator, and also Bergen Eskilsson. And I'll botch your name every time, Bergen. I'm sorry. And Bergen is our wood utilization coordinator. So we're excited to be here today and talk about some forest product innovations and also shared stewardship. So we've changed this up a little as some of the panel members that were originally going to be here to talk about forest products were unable to make it. So we thought, let's throw shared stewardship into this and let you guys know what we do with that, because it's a big part of what we do and it's really exciting, the things that Laura's doing with her program. So what we'll do today is I'll just give an overview of where we're at with the forestry programs here in the state of Utah. We feel like there's some really exciting things going down in the state of Utah. And then we'll roll into shared stewardship with Laura, and then we'll talk about the wood utilization timber world with Bergen. And then we can just open it up to open discussion, throw some questions at Bergen or Laura and or me, and we'll go from there. So as you all know, forested lands in Utah are one of the most valuable assets that we have. Not only do these areas provide habitat for our wildlife and scenic beauty and clean air, but they're also timber products. And so over the last 2 decades, concerns have been growing about the health of our forests and disturbance from insects, disease, and wildfires. Drought and warmer temperatures and longer summers have been taking a toll on our landscapes here in Utah. And our goals here in Utah that are reflected in our Utah Forest Action Plan are to restore healthy and resilient trees and forests. We also are looking at reducing wildfire risks to communities, water resources, and other natural resource values. We want to increase partnerships for landscape-scale forest restoration initiatives and build capacity among partners, stakeholders, and communities to engage in forest restoration activities. Part of the fourth goal is to engage more forestry work across all forested lands in the state and to stimulate a greater use of wood materials from these forestry activities for business and economic development. And through shared stewardship, our recent partnership initiative with the Forest Service, we've created the Wood Utilization and Business Development Program to begin addressing those objectives. So Bergen will provide more information on his program, and Laura will also do that for you on the Shared Stewardship Program. But we're at an exciting and challenging time here in forestry for Utah, and as other states across the nation, we think that we're coming together quite nicely. Our partnership with the Forest Service has grown through Utah's Shared Stewardship Agreement, and we've been learning to identify and share priorities and to share resources for implementing projects across the forested lands. So the U.S. Congress is currently taking a significant new funding for the Forest Service to work with states to accelerate efforts and to treat forests on all lands in order to reduce wildfire risks. And this could be a significant opportunity for Utah to determine how we would like to use the increased funding towards our goal of building capacity among partners, and also to carry out those actions in our forest plan. So while we're facing the challenges in our forests and we're facing these opportunities, I feel like this is a time that we can work together, we can share our goals and our priorities on our landscapes, and we can engage in informed effort, and we can share resources towards implementing projects, monitoring outcomes, and we can learn together. And with that being said, I'll go ahead and turn the time over to Laura.
All right, thank you, Jamie. As Jamie mentioned, I am the Shared Stewardship Coordinator for Utah, specifically work out of the Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. And in Utah, we signed a Shared Stewardship Agreement in 2019 in May, and we were one of the first states to do that. And what's kind of unique about our agreement, it was signed at the highest level. So Secretary Perdue and Governor Herbert signed that agreement, and we're excited about that agreement. We've had about 2 years now to implement that agreement. So I just want to talk a little bit about shared stewardship, and then I'm going to show a video. But really, shared stewardship in Utah, every state's different. And in Utah, it's about protecting communities and watersheds from catastrophic fire. And it's also a recognition that in the face of climate change, longer, more severe fire seasons, everything Jamie talked about, insects and disease, invasive species, that we can't do this alone. It really has to be a collaborative effort. And in Utah, the core group is the Forest Service, Department of Natural Resources in the state, the Forest Service, NRCS, and the Governor's Public Lands Policy Coordination Office. And then we're bringing in partners. And the video I want to show today is about a project in Beaver County. It's called the Beaver River Project. And we kind of hold it up as our flagship project, and it's getting a lot of attention across the nation, and they're really doing it right. So if we can go ahead and show that video, and we'll talk a little bit about it after.
Shared stewardship is about bringing people together, and very initially, it was about bringing the state and the Forest Service together, and it will take all of us to deal with wildfire risk.
Historically, we've always looked at these little postage stamps, 10, 20, 50, 100 acres. This one's looking large scale.
But just having a big line of defense is not enough. You have to impact the whole system.
Shared stewardship is a way of bringing folks who care about the wildfire problem together to make a very big difference.
Even though this particular site is on National Forest System land, if you go a mile up the road, we're on a totally different jurisdiction.
Our project here that we're talking about today is the Beaver River Watershed Improvement Shared Stewardship Project. We started overlapping with Bureau of Land Management, we started overlapping with the city or with the counties and with the state lands. And so we started to have to go, hey neighbors, how can we work together to not have these lines on the map and all of a sudden our treatments stop?
There is no one entity that can do this by itself. Instead, we can work together to confront the major challenges of catastrophic wildfire.
We have more tools now within shared stewardship than we've ever had because we have all the partners at the table.
We're bringing the resources that we need and the partnerships we need to be able to really make a difference on this landscape.
So this project benefits you because what we're doing is identifying those areas that are most at risk.
Where can we truly make a difference long-term on the ground to get work done that will help protect our citizens?
We have homes, we have campgrounds, we have a municipal watershed. We also have a high fire risk in this area. So this is an area where that risk and that value intersect.
And getting ahead of those problems provides huge benefits because we won't have to invest in large-scale firefighting.
And so this is something that's been very deliberate, very strategic on when and where we're doing our treatments.
So shared stewardship is about working with the right partners at the right time in the right places.
A lot of emphasis is going to be put on the protection of these values. So we want to do these mechanical treatments up front to set our suppression resources up for success.
Mitigation is the one thing that we can deal with. We use that mitigation in such a way that critical areas are treated. We interrupt that continuity so we can affect how wildfire reacts when it hits that area.
The core treatments that we are working on are mastication, or it's a mechanical technique.
Mastication is a rotating head. They grind up or shred the vegetation.
We have thinning.
Ladder fuels are the fuels that allow the fire to climb into the canopy. If we can eliminate the ladder fuels by use of a chainsaw, which is just pruning the tree up, it makes it more difficult for the fire to leave the forest floor and climb into the canopy.
Getting rid of dangerous trees, cleaning the underbrush.
We can use prescribed fire in a controlled manner, or even wildfire at the right place at the right time.
Carrying drip torches in our hands, Terra torches on UTVs. Then we also use aerial equipment.
We have a few contractors that are now mechanically inclined. So machines do all the falling and bucking and slash gathering.
Contractors are going to get the trees, they're going to drop the trees and then pile them. We are working forward to look at the whole landscape, but we had to be very strategic on kind of the where and the when, and then allow fire to do its natural thing.
Not only are we trying to protect private property and we've got the ski resort, that's a huge economic boom, but also the watershed.
A great amount of water in Utah comes from National Forest System lands, the mountains. And if we have a wildfire come through and affect the water delivery system, that can be even a bigger deal than affecting some structures.
We're contracting with timber companies to remove saw logs and larger trees, and they're turning those into wood products.
Cut it, we're going to drop it, and then we're also going to deck it. And then long term, the plan is to sell those decks. So we are getting a product off the forest. We also looking at all the other benefiting factors. So we're trying to build partnerships. We're trying to build resiliency in the landscape, because not all fire is bad. Fire in the right time, right place, and the right intensity is really good. And also we're trying to help local communities.
We're always collaborating. We're talking to them on where they're working. So if they're saying they're working close to a community, we focus in on that community.
One of the great things about being the sheriff in Beaver County is the great relationships with our locals.
We had a fire up on the mountain near the resort this year.
I was working over at the lodge. I looked out and the fire was already extremely larger than we could handle. Very short. I mean, I was very impressed with the time that everyone got up here, that the sheriffs and water tankers and things started getting up here.
These guys were so on the ball and so on top of things.
I mean, it seriously all comes together as one big group, and without those, we wouldn't be here right now. Working as a community is a real honor, because if we don't work as a team, really dangerous, scary things could happen.
Our goals in working together is to really create a safer and healthier forest.
You have to do these things at large scales to have an impact and for them to matter.
Shared stewardship is about bringing people into that fold of, we have an issue, let's work on it. And that's what makes it pretty exciting, is it's working.
From everything that I have seen, shared stewardship is the big success story in the West. And this shared stewardship might be the key to having healthy forests again.
All right, well, thank you for taking the time to watch the video. I just want to hit on a few points that were made there. One, we're definitely committed to working together, or planning together first, and then working together, and then working with local communities, industry, and other partners to develop our capacity and to utilize wood products for innovative economic development. And we can do that and also reduce fire risk at the same time, which I think is important. And we also talked about needing to do this at a landscape scale and cross-boundary. And one of the things I want to point out, Jared Whitmer, who's the district ranger on the Beaver River project, he talked about selling those decks. So we made this video last year, and Bergen and I and a bunch of people were on the timber tour of that project on Tuesday. And in fact, those decks have been sold. They're still putting more in the decks. But the cool thing about those is there's two separate products in those decks. There's the merchantable dimensional lumber that are in those decks, and they've been sold to a contractor. And then the non-merchantable timber, so the dead fallen things, have also been decked, and that's also been sold to a separate contractor. Well, is about to be sold, hopefully. Fingers crossed that's happening. But that's a big deal. A lot of that non-merchantable timber we've had a hard time selling, and we have to spend money just to take it out of the forest. And so we're excited about that and to see it all stacked up there. And I just want to really hit on the point that improving forest-related economic opportunities is key to improving our forest conditions overall. And it's been interesting. It's kind of been a shift for a lot of what we've done. So this Beaver River project and one of the contractors we have out there, when he's doing this logging and taking this timber out, he's also cleaning up the other fuels around it. So he's not just selectively taking logs. He has an objective to also manage the landscape around where he's doing that. And it's time intensive and labor intensive and costs more, but it's really what we need. And I think it's a win-win, right? Like, we have these opportunities to improve our forest conditions and make forests healthy, and also put some things back into the economy, and especially in rural Utah where that's needed. But we can't do it alone. We need to make all these puzzle pieces work together, and I'm going to turn it over to Bergen to talk about how we're doing that.
So my name is Bergen Eskildsen. I'm the Wood Utilization and Business Development Coordinator for the Utah Division of Forestry, Fire, and State Lands. So in this role, my focus is on engaging entrepreneurs and businesses with different state, local, and federal agencies. And the goal of that is to increase market opportunities for wood products and stimulate economic capacity wherever possible. So, like Jamie said, over the last few decades, we've had concerns growing among scientists, natural resource managers, and policymakers about the health of our nation's forests. And so we've seen rising levels of insects, disease, and wildfire. Factors that have contributed to this include fire suppression and selective logging, which have altered the structure of our forests. Environmental restriction has reduced access and management to those very same forests many of which are located on our federal lands here in the state of Utah. We've had prolonged drought, changing climate, and beetle infestations, and increased tree mortality, as well as increased risk of catastrophic wildfire. So our 2021 Forest Action Plan recognizes that we have limited capacity to address these issues. So Jamie had mentioned the 4 goals of the Forest Action Plan, and the 4th goal especially is what this position is focused on. We really want to build capacity among partners, stakeholders, and communities to engage in forest restoration activities across the state. And we see that from the federal government. Their goal is now to also increase that same capacity. So over the last 2 decades as well, the total timber production in the state is only half of what it used to be. And one of the key impacts of this decline of rural manufacturing and forest jobs is the decline of infrastructure and simply just the capacity to do forest work. So it always comes back to capacity. And we see from this graph that the state's timber harvest in 2007 was 73% of what it was in 2002, and only about 1/2 of the 1992 level. So these declines in Utah's timber harvest volumes pose significant challenges to both the industry and forest sustainability. Because the ability to conduct this vegetation management and mitigate these mortality impacts has decreased as we see these timber processors and forest operators going out of business. So this decrease in forest-related businesses and jobs reflects a reduction in the capacity of all forest management partners, including federal, state, and local agencies. And we also want to mention tribes, private landowners, and private forestry business as important stakeholders, as well as we continue to actively manage these forests and do the work needed to address these forest health concerns. So Laura also discussed shared stewardship. Just going a little more into detail about some of the plan or the action plan goals that guide the work that I'm doing. So we have number 1 is accelerate planning. Number 2 is to increase the pace of implementation. Number 3 is to focus on economic development. Number 4 is to provide more training. And number 5 is to convene stakeholders and leverage their interests. So the wood utilization program was created through this shared stewardship program. That's why it's so important in the work that we're doing. And number 4 goal of the stewardship action plan is one of the huge challenges we're facing right now in the timber industry. And recognizing this, we've developed key performance indicators for defining success in shared stewardship. We have a number of measures. Measure number 10 is the economic development focused initiative that my position is also focused on. So in these KPIs for measure number 10 include increasing the supply of timber and woody materials to support the wood utilization industry in Utah. We'd also like to improve the certainty and consistency of timber or wood product supply from national forests to support this wood utilization industry. And then we'd like to increase the number of jobs in forest management, fuels reduction, and timber and wood product processing and utilization. And finally, we have retaining and expanding businesses in forest management and fuels reduction and wood product processing and utilization. So with these goals, we've been working with state, federal, and local agencies as well as universities to gather some baseline data just to gauge where we're at now so we can track these improvements, and eventually the goal is to create a dashboard where we can actively see where we are at on these key performance indicators. So as part of this wood utilization program, we, in an effort to track the status of these forest and wood products industry partners, we've started visiting every sawmill in the state of Utah, and we're just about done visiting every mill, no matter what the size. We're focused on the big businesses and just as much the small businesses. And we've really been able to identify opportunities through these sawmill visits of where possible expansions may be, who may be interested in taking on some of these niche products and filling these market opportunities that need to be that are there and available, but just need to get the inertia going for them. We've also seen with these sawmill visits, gauged a lot of the issues from the existing issues from these sawmills and logging businesses. So we see a huge one is workforce capacity issues. Recruiting and maintaining skilled maintenance workers and mechanical maintenance trade, all those kinds of workers has been challenging, as there's a lot of technical expertise needed to run a fellow buncher. For example, we were just at the Beaver River Watershed project where we saw that there was a need for feller bunchers. It takes a lot of amount of training, and just the capacity isn't there to train these workers. So we've also seen a shortage of log and chip drivers. I think that's nationwide. There is trucking shortages, and that especially impacts the forest and wood products industry. High cost of transportation is another one. A lot of these sites are very remote in forest roads where the roads aren't maintained very well, so that adds into high road construction and improvement costs, as well as just high infrastructure costs for the equipment that they're using at these sites. We run into supply issues at times where many of the sawmills and loggers feel as though they're not able to access the supply they need, or at least if there is access to that supply, the quality of timber within those timber cells isn't exactly what they're looking for. So we're trying to work with the Forest Service, and we are really excited about the shared stewardship because it allows us to kind of communicate those issues cross boundary, and like we say, there's no boundaries out. The fires don't know boundaries, so we need to continue this cross collaborative effort. And in doing that, we are also meeting with our other state and federal partners. So we've been very active in meeting with the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity, Utah's Energy Office, and Biomass. USDA Rural Development is another really good partner. And then as well as down to the very local level with small business development centers and even our local EDPs from municipalities and counties across the state. And so this, I won't go too much into this, the modules of the business expansion and retention process, but it kind of guides the work we do and just gives purpose to why we're going out to these sawmills to gather this information, analyze what we have, and be able to report out on it so we can organize it in a way that is really effective for these businesses and hopefully gain some economic development and gain market access into places where markets are there. just need the push to get them going. So another exciting opportunity we have coming up this fiscal years, we'll be working on a wood innovations grant. Forestry, Fire, and State Lands plans to apply for this grant to establish a statewide wood utilization team and establish increasing wood products manufacturing capacity and markets that support forest ecosystem restoration. So the objectives of this group are very similar and aligned with our forest action plan as well as the shared stewardship action plan goals. Just promoting economic and environmental health of communities, reducing hazardous fuels, and improving forest health on the national forest system and other lands, expanding and accelerating wood products and wood energy markets throughout Utah, and involving wood products and wood industry partners. So we're hoping this will be a sort of advisory panel that can guide these different businesses and just support the development of domestically sourced timber and really just create jobs, especially in rural areas. We've seen how important it is to retain those jobs. We have a lot of growth on the Wasatch Front, and we recognize that we want to help the other rural Utah grow in the same way that the Wasatch Front is experiencing that growth. So my involvement and our involvement with the Council of Western State Foresters Forest Utilization Network has been very helpful in just gathering ideas, and we've seen other states be able to utilize a grant in the same way. You see this map here of the states that have currently funded wood energy teams and currently funded wood utilization teams. So we haven't got a grant specifically in the state of Utah. We're very active in engaging with Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico in their Southwest Ecological Restoration Institute. And hopefully we're hoping we can do something similar in Utah just to help build that capacity that we're talking about. So one of these areas for wood utilization that's key to the work we're doing is biomass and energy. So we're working very heavily with the Utah Biomass Resources Group. They're out of Utah State University's Extension, and Darren McAvoy leads that group, and he's been very engaged in many of these areas, biomass, energy, and biochar, which I'll go into in a little bit. So in Utah, we don't have any existing woody biomass plants operating, but there have been efforts to create biofuels from biomass markets. These include anything from biodiesel, jet fuel, hydrogen, and we have the potential to become active in the development of these resources for domestic use and even to export to other states and countries eventually is the goal. So we are also leveraging the Utah Governor's Office of Energy Development has an alternative energy development incentive that includes biomass specifically. If you meet a certain amount of barrels per day of biomass production, you can qualify for this incentive. And we're also working, like I said, with the other state agencies and leveraging their grants and tax incentives to help these businesses in the best way that we can. Biochar is another one of these fields that's an emerging field, and we've seen demonstrations from the Utah Biomass Resources Group. Darren McAvoy, again, has been very active in that area and highlighting the importance of biochar and the impact it could have on our forest health and restoration. So we have seen that biochar through studies has improved soil functions, reduced emissions from biomass. It has a carbon sequestration value. We see many states having a cap and trade program with carbon. California especially has been very active in that, and they're even able to utilize carbon credits from California and Utah. So I think that is an avenue for biochar, and just goes back to removing that hazardous fuels for forest health and meeting our action plan goals through these market-driven approaches. Mass timber and CLT is another area that we're focused on that could be a huge market for wood products, even low-value wood products. There's Utah State was able to secure a Wood Innovations grant back in 2015 to build a interlocking CLT building at their Kaysville Botanical Center, just here up on the Ross Edge front. And they're continually looking for funding for that building, and we at FFSL are trying to support that because we would see that as a huge success to have a showcase building on the Wasatch Front to be able to show what is possible with mass timber and CLT. And there's a lot of emerging wood products, specifically in the construction industry. We see OSB as one of them. There's many others that are able to utilize lower value, not necessarily the dimensional lumber, which is a huge success if we're able to continue driving these markets. So other uses, there's various other very niche markets. We see firewood is a huge one. I've seen sawmills in the state be able to utilize the beetle kill wood from spruce bark beetle to make firewood and really getting that excess material off the land in a sustainable way. And posts and poles, many of our mining industry uses posts still as mine props, and they're able to use small diameter wood for those mine props, and poles for ranchers as well, for fencing, for agriculture, ranching. And there's all sorts of uses I won't go specifically into, but furniture, landscape chips, bark, anything that uses wood. We see animal bedding as another huge byproduct of a lot of these mills. We see turkey bedding, we see animal bedding at county fairs, local fairs are able to utilize this, and it's just from sawmills and this byproduct, and really make use of all the materials so that nothing is going to waste. So that's all I have for my presentation, but glad to be doing this work, and my contact information is here, so if there's anyone who has ideas or suggestions and that wants to work in the wood utilization area, let me know and feel free to contact me. I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thanks, Bergen and Laura. I think now is a great time to move into an open discussion. If there's questions out there, or I'm happy to answer questions and take some questions.
What you had in there is a crazy amount of content, and there's a lot of things we could go into on that. And I guess one of the first ones would be, and this would be for Jamie and Laura, when you are putting together a shared stewardship project, or any project for that matter, how much of a limiting factor is that forest products or processing capacity? How does the capacity limit factor into project prioritization and selection? Would be the question.
Well, I mean, Laura's the one who puts together all those shared stewardship projects, so I'll let her comment on that.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it does limit us, unfortunately. I mean, a couple ways to take that question. So the Beaver project, so the timber that you saw in the video was being taken to the sawmill directly from the project. The timber we saw on Tuesday was done, so there was money paid to the logger to deck it, and then the timber sale happened after it was decked. And so that's always a hard, so it works, but you're paying more, right? Because we're paying the logger to do the work, and then we're selling the decks, but we're not making up what we paid the logger. But that's okay, because we're using it for fuel reduction too, and we're happy that it's going to good places. But yeah, it is limiting. Sometimes we can't find capacity to do projects, and so some things that we've planned to get done in a year, we like to only fund things that are going to happen in a year. They don't happen because there's not the capacity there to do it, and we bring in a lot of out-of-state capacity to do this work. We'd love to see that happen in state. Unfortunately, it's not there yet. And so we talk about mills and wood utilization, but I think there's also a place for just fuel reduction crews to be based in state, and that would be really helpful.
So when you look at it, so what are some of the factors that need to be in place to attract that capacity, whether it's physical infrastructure, workforce, those elements? If you were putting together a 3-point plan to entice employers, and maybe this is, all of you can answer this one, what does that plan look like, and what needs to happen to make that work? And how can, if you had federal resources, other state resources available to plug into those kinds of efforts, what does that look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think what we hear from industry is we need to know that there's a continuing source of product, right? Like, nobody wants to start a business that's going to have 4 years of product, and I think that's number one. And I think we know that we're going to have a bunch of biomass. The condition that our forests are in now, a supply of biomass well into the future is there. It's a matter of making sure that it's in places that people can get to, and that it makes it economic sense to use that biomass. And then a shift, like Bergen talked about, cross-laminated timber and OSB and things like that. You know, Utah doesn't have a huge stock of dimensional lumber. It's just not the type of forest we grow, especially anymore. So it's, I mean, I think number one, it's the supply. Bergen, I don't know if you want to add to what our plan would be if we could make it perfect.
Yeah, I think that's perfect. It really just goes back to where a lot of these producers need long-term agreements just to make sure they're able to get the materials they need to operate. I think another thing is just increasing the awareness of these different markets. I think a lot of these are new or just emerging markets that have huge potential, but we just need to get these forest products partners aware of these opportunities. And I think there's a lot of habit to just kind of stay in the same lane they're in and keep doing the same things they're doing, but with our changing forest conditions and what's being offered in timber sales could really help support these new and emerging markets, that just increasing that education and awareness of these markets would help with.
And I'll just add one thing. I mean, go back to the fuels reduction. I think we're going to have an influx of money to do fuels reduction, and that can help. Tying that to industry is big, right? Because we can incentivize doing more.
Yeah, and the other thing I will add too is I think Bergen's position is so important, because what we always hear is this disconnect between industry and product. And I think that that's what Bergen really brings to the table, is that connection of bringing industry and product together, and that he can help facilitate some of that. So that's really what he's been working on.
And one of the challenges with that is when you're trying to explain this to a state legislature that's going to be funding a project, and if I'm the governor trying to defend a budget request, there's what percentage, I guess here's the question, what percentage of all of this stuff actually produces net revenue versus loss? And that'll lead to a couple more questions.
So can I spin that a little bit differently? Yeah. So yeah, we might not be making, I mean, we might be subsidizing some of these industries, and but the alternative is if we lose a community or we lose a watershed. I know Gene Shawcroft talked yesterday from Central Utah Water Conservancy District about the fire that they had in the Dollar Ridge and Starvation Reservoir. It took them $26 million to upgrade their plant. And that's what we need to look at, right? Like, if we don't put money into this, we're going to continue to spend money on restoration and rehabilitation. And to that end, we've been working with a number of water conservancy districts in the state, and Central Utah is the first to step up this year and start investing in mitigation projects. And so we're really excited about where that's going to lead, and they're excited. And we expect that a number of water conservation districts in the state are going to follow that lead.
That leads then to, and Jamie, you mentioned Council of Western State Foresters, and what a great group of people that is. That's an invaluable resource, and we're really lucky. WGA coordinates a lot and communicates a lot with the council, and that's awesome because it creates better awareness for the governors of the challenges that state foresters face, and hopefully it gives you some idea of some of the challenges governors are facing. One of those issues is, and the council's working on it right now, is updating the true cost of wildfire report, which it's current in its initial form, great, looking at case studies and specific circumstances, the costs involved with wildfire, and so that you can evaluate mitigation costs versus doing nothing and the restoration cost. And I hope that the update here will greatly expand the applicability of that, not just focusing on case studies. And I know that's the intent of the council, to try to translate that more broadly. And that's an important tool to try to assess, because there is nothing out there right now, to try to assess, okay, what are the trade-offs of spending now versus spending later? And you know you're going to have to spend later.
Yeah.
So thank you for your work to push that forward, because I think that'll be a really valuable addition to the public debate about these relative costs. And what that does, and Laura, you talked about it a little bit, is the role of subsidies, or and a lot of people don't like to use the subsidy word, but we're subsidizing this work one way or the other, no matter what you do. And so if I'm looking at subsidizing an end product versus just subsidizing the work on the front end, right, the mitigation work, when you look at corn and ethanol as an example of a subsidy that creates a market for a product. Could we be doing the same thing with some of the what is otherwise pretty low value material that comes off of a forest? How much have you guys looked into that? What kind of potential is there for using that kind of a model to establish markets? And I mean, look at this. Across the West, we see the problem with this really low value biomass. And you look at what's going on with what used to be the Forestry project in Arizona, and the market issue having affected the ability to execute there. But that exists throughout the West. So let me throw that at you, just the whole markets and subsidies. And
So I'll say one thing and then I'll let Bergen kind of take it, but we like to call those incentives. Because I think what we've seen sometimes in the past is that we do try and subsidize and we do try and create something that, I mean, I can think of a few examples, but try and get someone into the firewood market and we subsidize them and we get them all the equipment, and then there's just no stock there to keep that going, and that doesn't really help anyone in the long run. And so if we can find ways instead of subsidizing, and I think that gets, it's not a term that we like to use, but incentivize and help and connect all the dots and put it together so that we incentivize people to get into the market, and then the free market, it works, and then we don't have to keep subsidizing or incentivizing, unless we look at fuel reduction as a subsidy. But I don't think we need to even look at that way, because the contractors we're hiring, they're doing work, and I don't know. I'll let Bergen answer it better.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that Laura's exactly right, and I'm glad you brought up the true cost of the wildfire. I've seen reports that show just the difference of fire mitigation costs compared to what it would have costed to do the woods and the work that would have prevented that large-scale catastrophic fire. And so, we've explored many ideas around how to encourage these market-driven approaches, I think we're really focused on the private sector because we see them as kind of champions of being able to do these, get into these emerging markets, and if we have to provide some kind of incentives to help out with that, that may be needed, but we're just hoping we can really work with them at a boots on the ground level to help them be able to realize these markets and get into these different fields.
Bergen, can you maybe talk about, are there like some federal program incentives that help private sector entities like this, or?
Yeah, so I guess a huge one I'll mention is the Wood Innovations grant that we're actually applying to. So that's actually so different states can apply to that to build wood utilization teams like we're doing, but it's also very geared towards the private sector as well. And I've seen mills be able to, there's certain requirements that limit what you're able to buy in terms of infrastructure for your mill, but I think that is a huge opportunity if these different businesses are able to look into those requirements and see if there's anything that they're wanting to upgrade or expand that would meet those requirements. I think that's a great option, and just getting that word out. We've worked very actively with the U.S. Forest Service's Wood Innovations Coordinator up for Region 1 and 4. Julie Keys has been awesome, and she's very active in promoting the program and getting the word out. So I think if people are interested in that too, they can help. They can contact me. They can reach out to Julie as well, and she's just as happy to answer any of those questions.
When you're talking about mills, like on a, does it usually have to be a larger scale mill in order to find it to be cost effective for them to do something like this, or can some of the smaller scale mills, is it an advantage for them to enter into some of this also, or?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think a lot of these smaller mills especially have these opportunities with not having to retrofit any of their equipment. They're able to do more of these kind of, boots on the ground projects and utilize a lot of this, especially lower value timber. I know a lot of these small mills aren't able to compete in these large timber sales where they're able to get dimensional lumber, so they're able to turn to these other markets like posts and poles and mine props and just those different markets. Especially we see that a lot from our small mills.
And maybe one thing just to add, what we're hearing a lot too is, and Bergen mentioned it in his presentation, is finding the labor force that wants to do this type of work and being able to fund that labor force. And that's a conversation we had out in the woods with some folks the other day. And I know some schools in Oregon and places are turning towards doing programs like technical training on how to do this work, and maybe that's something that we need to look at in this state, is finding skilled people to do this type of work.
2 quick follow-ups, and then I'll give it to Kevin. But federal and other assistance available, have you guys have you found NGOs or foundations that are interested in this same set of issues and could loop into this work as well?
I think we're just starting to get into that and find those. I don't think Utah's traditionally had a lot of those NGOs, but we're working with other NGOs that have been in the state to help focus their efforts on some of this.
Okay. Last question, and then I'll hand it to Kevin, but I'm not done with you guys. And Laura, you mentioned it. Because of the capacity constraints, if I'm looking at Congress doing an infrastructure package or a budget reconciliation bill and potentially adding billions of dollars to for the purpose of wildfire mitigation, I think everybody, having worked for Congress, I know that they will expect that trees are coming down the next day. Mm-hmm. And but what kind of expectations should Congress have for how that money gets used, and how much do these capacity constraints and the lack of workforce, I mean, what I see is that there's a lot of underlying work to be done before you can actually get out and change those. And we're not even touching environmental requirements and all that other stuff. So if you're talking to a member of Congress about what they should expect if billions and billions of dollars comes through for wildfire mitigation, how do you temper expectations for what will happen?
Well, we've started having those conversations already about wildfire mitigation money, and it's hard to say right now just because we don't know exactly what's coming, but we've started those conversations with our federal partners because we kind of know, okay, this might be what's coming to us. But basically what we've said is if the money comes and we need to get it put on the ground, we'll figure out how to get it done. Whether it's, putting fuels crews on the ground, hiring fuels crews, and figuring out how to get contracting in place. I mean, reducing these fuels and looking wildfire in the eye and saying we've got to reduce this risk it's super important to us. So finding a way to get it done is something that we're very serious about.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, it is a concern. I had this conversation with the timber administrators on Tuesday, and like I said, we're hiring a lot of out-of-state crews. If this influx of money comes to the West, those crews can go home and sleep in their own bed every night. They don't have to come to Utah. And so, but it also, with this influx of funding, some of these jobs don't pay a great wage, and so it might allow, and it's something we've been focused on is wages, and might be able to help us make everything work better, I guess.
One quick follow-up,
yeah,
and then I'll shut up. How important is the shared stewardship strategy when, with that influx of money, you start trying to figure out prioritization of work and the interaction between what's going on in the federal land, what the priorities you guys have for the state look like, and then the needs of local communities?
Oh, I think it's right at the front of the table. I mean, I think it all just comes right together. I think, we're just working hand in hand with all of that, for sure.
And through those priorities, I'll just say that we have lists of projects, and we have unmet. We had $14 million in requests just for shared stewardship there this year, and had $5 million in funding. And I know the same's true for WRI, Watershed Restoration Initiative, that presented yesterday. So if we're looking to put money on the ground immediately, I think we're set up to do that.
Yeah, and looking to see where we can do projects that are large scale and they all meet together. I mean, that would be the ultimate goal, right? Is to say, okay, where does this meet a WRI, a shared stewardship, and reduce the most amount of fuels? I mean, that would be the ultimate goal.
And then, all right, and then I promise I'm done. So to what extent also within the shared stewardship, do you bring in NRCS to talk about how you integrate all this work across multiple ownerships and make sure that the private landowners are also engaged in those planning processes and the execution?
Well, I'll start and then I'll let Laura take it, but NRCS sits right at that shared stewardship table, so we're working with them hand in hand, but I'll let Laura add to that.
Yeah, so something exciting that I think tomorrow is the first of your new fiscal year for the federal government, right? So we're entering into an agreement with NRCS for a shared equipped forester position through shared stewardship, and that's really exciting because we've traditionally used EQIP with private landowners, forest landowners in the past, and then we've we're still using it some, but not as much as we could. So we're really excited to do that again and open up all those opportunities for private landowners. And our foresters and our wildland urban interface folks are working with private landowners and doing that cross-boundary stuff. So this is just another opportunity to do more of that. So we're really excited to have them join us and work together.
Cool. All right, now I promise.
Thanks, Troy. So this question actually comes from one of our audience members, and she's wondering about kind of the age of the logging truck fleet, and if there are any potential risks with some of those vehicles aging out, both generally, but also because of emissions regulations, and if that could have any costs on, or effects on transportation costs, or just, the forest sector in general, and if, that's a serious concern that we need to think about.
Yeah, definitely. I think that comes back to just the large infrastructure costs up front that are required for a lot of these mills. We see trucks are just another one of those pieces of equipment that very expensive, and it goes kind of back to that. It's worth the infrastructure investment if you're able to get a return on that and have a guaranteed supply of timber, to where these mills and these businesses, wood products businesses, are able to be able to get that infrastructure and get a return on their investment.
And then one other one that I wanted to ask about is just, read a lot of news articles earlier this year about the price of timber going way up and then, coming back down to reality, and was just curious about, what did that look like on the ground in Utah, both with, traditional dimensional lumber, but also some of these innovative, kind of niche forest products that we talked about here on this panel.
Yeah, so I would say COVID, definitely, we all saw the price of lumber skyrocket like it had never before. That we didn't really see the effects of that specifically in Utah. What we learned on the Beaver River Watershed project that we were at recently was a lot of these loggers will sell their decks or sell their logs to a broker, and so the broker is the one who more so has the power over the price. So it's the loggers have to predict kind of what the markets are, but it's more the broker who sets the price, and the loggers more not that it stays exactly the same, but they're more predictable than whatever the broker sells it for.
Yeah, you don't see the fluctuation. The timber sales don't happen quickly enough that we see it happen on the ground, I don't think.
Gotcha. And then, Bergen, I know that you got some talking points from Darren and wish that he could be here today, but wanted to follow up with some of the biochar information that you shared, and we're actually going to, at our Colorado workshop next week, we're going to go way deep into biomass and biochar, but was just curious about what are some of the infrastructure needs for developing that product, and if there's any opportunities for federal funding there, or just opportunities that you see to expand the development of biochar, and primarily I'd say for forest health applications and use in restoration contexts.
Yeah, I'd say just going back to Utah Biomass Resources Group, Darren McAvoy has been very, very active in promoting this big box biochar. It's basically this big dumpster-looking thing, but you're able to put low-value material into this thing, burn it down into a biochar. So instead of lighting up piles for fuels reduction, which is often done in forests, they're able to actually create a byproduct from these biochar kilns. And I guess the one thing holding that back from it, we just need an economy of scale for that type of biochar production. So I'm not sure if that looks like a central biochar facility or what that may look like, but if we're able to scale up and bring that biochar to an economy of scale, I think we would really have a profitable market there in Utah and across other states in the West as well.
If I could the scalability of biochar, I think, is amazing, because Darren's created this plan that landowners can build smaller biochar kilns that they can pull behind their truck or their side-by-side and do the work and then use that biochar on their own land. And so I think that's pretty cool too.
Perfect. Well, sounds like we need to get Darren on the phone with WJ after this meeting. And then just one final one from me. I know that Troy has done some work in this space, but just related to the use of cross-laminated timber and mass timber generally in construction, can you just speak to what some of the, building or regulatory barriers that may be present and, related to building codes or whatever it may be, and if there are any opportunities to kind of grow awareness around the construction applications with some of those wood products, and if there's any way that WJ can be helpful in building that awareness.
Yeah, so from my understanding, a lot of these, the building codes that were changed just recently to allow for the development of mass timber. So the potential is there. It's just getting these developers to come in. We're in early discussions with developers who are wanting to do these mass timber projects. We have one even at the University of Utah that is looking to build a large mass timber building, multiple story building. And so the opportunity is there. It's just finding these developers and to do that work. And yeah, like I said, we're in the process of meeting with them. So it'll be exciting to see these opportunities come to fruition. And that's why we're really hoping that USU Kaysville campus can kind of serve as that model project to show other developers around the nation that Utah is open to the development of mass timber, and it can be a huge success for restoring the health of our forests.
One more question, and it goes back to the capacity issues and the assistance that's available. And I guess the question is this: you guys work a lot with U.S. Forest Service and BLM too, I would imagine, and NRCS. To what extent, though, are there other agencies that you work with? And in my mind, I'm going through like USDA, Rural Development, Department of Commerce, EDA, to look at what kind of programs they've got, those other agencies have, that could help with some of the workforce training and some of the physical infrastructure elements of the infrastructure we need to do this work. And would it be helpful, I guess the follow-on then is, would it be helpful for somebody to try to bring those groups together and look at this more deeply? How maybe you could take this and that and this piece from different agencies and coordinate it into an effort that would get us what we need.
Yeah, and I think Bergen spent a good amount of time, looking at what programs are available and, what avenues we could explore to make it more successful. I think that's an area that we could definitely explore more to see how, the state, the feds, anyone, we could put together a better program to make this more successful. And I think that's something that Bergen continues to work on. And that is one of the goals of his, that he continues to achieve. So, Bergen, do you want to comment more on that?
Yeah, and yeah, well, like I said, we've been very active in working with state-level agencies. They have a lot of incentives and tax credits, especially the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity. They're able to, they have this rural focus, which is really good for a lot of our small businesses out in rural areas. They're able to utilize some of these tax credits and incentives, but we're also just trying to work with them to help increase awareness of these issues so that we can eventually maybe even develop some type of business and expansion and retention approach specifically to forestry. And I think we're in conversations with those agencies, both state and federal, just to get that interest and awareness out so that maybe policy can be changed to allow for these types of incentives, specifically in the wood products and timber industry.
Okay. Any other questions, comments from folks here? I could nerd out with you guys all day long. This is a great discussion. So, but we'll cut you a break. But also, I'll let you guys close, and then we'll offer any closing comments you want, and then let you loose for now.
Well, we just appreciate the opportunity to be here today and meet with you and discuss this. It's a very important topic to us, so we appreciate being able to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll just say thank you and thanks to all our partners. It's great to have the Forest Service and the NRCS and the Public Lands Policy Office. And, shared stewardship is about collaboration and bringing people together, and we're excited about that.
Yeah, I'll just kind of add to that. We're we're thankful for our partners and the involvement we've had with them, and I'm just looking forward to continue doing this work and solving some of these issues. I know the wildfires this year have been especially bad the last couple of years, and we'd like to not see smoke for 2 months straight in our valley, and I'm sure that's similar for many communities across the West. And so it's great to be here and be able to talk to a Western audience specifically, because these issues are very, very important and are not going away anytime soon. So we're excited to just help drive those solutions in whatever way we can.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time, sharing your expertise and wisdom, and we will bug you again. So thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.